Thanks for joining us. And today we're going to talk about Kriya Yoga is evidence-based. So when I say Kriya Yoga is evidence-based, what am I talking about here? Well, evidence could be considered as being able to observe certain phenomena being produced. So when we talk about evidence-based approaches, what we mean is that we are observing certain phenomena being reproduced again and again. And so this contrasts with people who have a particular method or approach to doing something but don't have any data to support that it's actually working. Evidence-based approaches bring in data of the application of those approaches. You can actually see, are things working? How are things working? You can talk about the quantitative aspect of how things are working and the qualitative aspect of how things are working. And together that brings a evidence-based approach. And so Kriya Yoga is an evidence-based approach. Now this contrasts with some meditation approaches where people will say things, make suggestions that the meditation should work in this and that way without any particular specifics that you can actually test, right? So you don't know. So if somebody says Kriya Yoga works because it burns up your karma, right? So this is, some Kriya Yoga schools will talk about this. They'll say it's burning up the seeds of karma, you know, you're being freed from your karma, you're being liberated as you're doing Kriya Yoga. That all sounds fine and dandy. However, there's no way that you can verify that that's actually having that effect, right? You don't have any ability. And so if the idea is because you don't have any ability to discern that, then you have to rely on the guru to tell you whether or not your karma is being burned up. You have really no way of verifying that. You're relying on somebody else completely. And you have no way to check that. So really what it does is it puts you in a bad position, right? In a dependent relationship of that particular person to tell you how things are going. Now it's true that people who have, follow certain gurus and believe in those ways that Kriya Yoga works and so on, they may feel that things are improving. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, right? But from my perspective, I would rather have an evidence-based approach. Evidence-based means that you can check, you and you alone, or anyone else can check all along the way whether or not something is actually working. And that's why Kriya Yoga is an evidence-based approach, especially the way that we teach it in Modern Kriya, because we teach the householder lineage of Panchanan Bhattacharya, who was Lahiri Baba's preeminent disciple. So the Kriya that we teach is considered the original Kriya. It has all of the 7 initiations or 7 chapters that were provided by Lahiri Baba to Panchanan Bhattacharya. And so the modern understanding of Kriya Yoga has much been refined by Forrest Knudsen to really understanding what's happening in the central nervous system. And it's built on a whole bunch of evidence-based research around meditation and breathing and so on. And so we know that the way that Kriya Yoga has been done for a very long time. The original folks who devised Kriya Yoga, so Lahiri Baba or Babaji or whoever came before them, it's an ingenious invention, an ingenious methodology, but we know it works because it's evidence-based, right? So we can see when we test certain aspects of the practice that we're actually getting results. The first one is affecting the heart rate, right? So in Kriya Yoga, we use a slow intentional breathing, which is called Kriya Pranayam, and the distilled version of that for non-Kriya yogis is called heart rate variability resonance breathing. This is something that Forrest Knudsen basically packaged and called in this way. He demystified Kriya, but we know that Kriya is working because it slows down your heart rate. So how does it do that? Well, with Kriya Yoga, you're doing a slow intentional breath, right? Kriya Yoga or heart rate variability resonance breathing, you're doing a slow intentional breath. What this slow intentional breath does is it lowers your breath below a certain threshold. And we know that when you hit 7 breaths per minute or less, you start to have an effect on your central nervous system. Basically, your parasympathetic nervous system becomes predominant and takes precedence over your sympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system is like the brake in the nervous system, as if it was a car. There's a car analogy I'm making, and the sympathetic nervous system is like the gas, right? So when you want to slow your yourself and get yourself into a low idle state, you need to engage the parasympathetic nervous system. So Kriya pranayama, or heart rate variability resonance breathing, does this by slowing down the breath. And especially when we slow down the breath and we accentuate or slow down, make the exhalation slower than the inhalation, we're putting pressure on a nerve that runs along the anterior part of our spine that has an effect on the medulla oblongata, which is in the brainstem. It controls the autonomic function of heart rate. And this slow, intentional breathing, especially the slower exhalation, slow down the heart rate. So we know that by doing Kriya pranayama, or heart rate variability resonance breathing, we're having a direct effect on our heart rate. And we know this because we can measure it, right? So what you can do is take your pulse. You can sit down, relax, take your pulse. So you turn on a stopwatch or watch a clock for a minute and count how many pulses there are that you have, right? So this is your resting heart rate. Then engage in Kriya pranayama, or heart rate variability resonance breathing. And if you don't know what heart rate variability resonance breathing is, there I will provide a link to a guided meditation for 5 minutes, right? Of you just follow the breath, inhale, exhale, so on, right? Measure your heart rate after you have sat down and done either heart rate variability resonance breathing or Kriya pranayama for 5 minutes. Is there a difference between your heart rate before and after? Well, guess what? There will be, because that's what it does. It's an evidence-based practice that affects your central nervous system and slows down your heart rate. So we know right away that Kriya Yoga is having an effect on us, right? It's an evidence-based. We can see it, we can test it. We don't have to believe it. We can believe it or disbelieve it. And actually, if we disbelieve it and do it and test it, we will find that it actually works. So it's evidence-based. It's not opinion-based. It's not somebody's theory about the world or a specific spiritual worldview. It's evidence-based. It works. You can see it reproduced in what happens time and time again for everyone. The next piece that happens, and evidence that you were shifting into a meditative state, is you start to experience the galvanic skin response. And the galvanic skin response is sometimes called the freeze response. What happens is that when your parasympathetic nervous system becomes predominant, you start to lose the sensations in your body, right? You're not feeling your body in the same way as you are when you're in a normal waking consciousness. And we shift into our parasympathetic nervous system predominantly when we go to sleep. The fact that we don't see or hear anything or feel anything when we're asleep is because the freeze response is active, right? In the case of meditation and Kriya Yoga in particular, this freeze response is active while we are awake. So we're in a waking consciousness, but the body basically starts to recede from our awareness. And the way that we experience the feelings is this galvanic skin response. So we might start to feel tingling in our hands or in different parts of our bodies, or we may feel our hands are hot and heavy, or we may feel a pulsation in the lower lip as the blood flows in and out. We may feel tingling up and down the spine or tingling throughout the body. These tingly sensations are signs that our galvanic skin response is engaged, which is a sign of the parasympathetic nervous system becoming predominant. And after we start to feel these tingly sensations, then the body relaxes so much that we no longer feel the body, right? This is what is called pratyahara in yoga. So by doing heart rate variability resonance breathing or Kriya pranayama, we will start to get signs of that freeze response, right? It is evidence that we're shifting into our parasympathetic nervous system and going into deep meditation, right? So there's another sign right there, another sign of the evidence that the meditation, that Kriya Yoga, is effective. You don't need to rely on somebody's opinion about it. Nobody can really tell you that that's happening. You just feel it, right? But you know it happens because it happens consistently if you do this practice, a sign of the evidence of Kriya Yoga working. Now, the third one that folks may or may not experience, depending on how long they've been doing meditation, is the tranquil breath. And the tranquil breath has been called by some as the breathless state. It's not true breathlessness, but what happens is you start breathing so slightly and so shallowly that your breath basically disappears. What happens when you get into the tranquil breath is that you get into a very deep internalized state. What is called dharana in yoga is referred to as an internalized void, where the perception of the body disappears. So no more freeze response, no more tingling, your body isn't even there. It may feel like it's a shadow, or it may feel like it's a shell, right? That is just maybe not even there, or it may disappear entirely and you're in this dark internalized void, a deep meditative state without awareness of the body, right? Sort of floating in the ether, if you will. And so that is further evidence that Kriya Yoga is working. And really, this is moving through the stages of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, right? So, when you're doing your pranayama, your intentional breathing, and then you get signs of pratyahara, right? The freeze response tingling throughout the body, and you start to get drawn within. The next stage is dharana, which happens when you basically get into the tranquil breath and the perception of the body disappears. You're in an internalized void. So right there, you don't need to believe in anything. You don't need anybody else's opinion to tell you what's happening. All you need to know is this unfolding in my meditation? And if it is, it's evidence that the Kriya Yoga is being practiced correctly because you're going through those stages of internalization, right? And so those are three key aspects of Kriya Yoga as an evidence-based approach, as an evidence-based practice that make it different from other meditation approaches that just talk about you needing to believe something, right? You can tell systematically all along the way, is this working? Because you get these signs, right? This evidence that the Kriya Yoga is helping you to get into a deep meditative state. So if you have any questions about this video, feel free to send me an email at info@modernkriya.com. Also check our website at modernkriya.com and our YouTube channel. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.